And I'm going to open the webinar. But again, feel free to talk.
Adam, last time we hung out, you're on some crazy ass diet. Are you still on a crazy ass diet?
Yeah, I am kind of. Yes, I'm on a crazy diet.
I just remember just being in the frigid cold of Vermont, and like Tony and I were like, "Where's Adam?" And he's like, "Oh, he's like working out in that terrible gym, that non-gym in that dorm." And every time we go out to like the bar, you would just like count the calories, like, just like, this is awesome.
I still do that. Over Vermont.
The attendees are entering the room.
I have my daughter bought a whole bunch of her teenage friends over, so hopefully there will be no screaming. At some point, I will have it on mute.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in a college dorm, so hopefully.
We'll see.
Where are you at now, Micah?
I'm living in Old Kenyon.
Okay.
The building that they put on the brochure.
Yeah, no. What is it? Is it the oldest Gothic building in the Midwest?
Mm-hmm. It probably was the oldest at some point before it burned down.
Yeah.
Haunted. Also haunted.
Haunted.
Yeah. Haunted building.
Haunted?
That was...
Adam leans forward.
No, that was the thing, like, my friend Dinty sent me these photos of like when he was teaching the summer last year, and he sent, not last year, the year before that, and he's like, this is where you're teaching, it's haunted. And he would send me like these orbs, right? Like those ghost hunting orbs that are everywhere. I'm like, dude, it's just dust. It's Kenyon, it's dust.
Kenyon was actually rated, some like kind of popular magazine rated Kenyon the 8th most haunted campus in the country.
There's been a lot of ratings, but we're always in like the top 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember, Oliver, what was the number one most haunted?
Number one? Oh, do you know? Are you testing me?
No, I mean, no, I have no idea.
Oh, someone. Okay, so that's right around the corner.
OU, Ohio University?
That's actually where I went for undergrad. I would believe that there is various ghost stories there.
Yeah.
Any good ones you can brief?
I have my own ghost story, actually. I never had one before, but I had a weird experience in San Francisco recently, so.
All right.
This building was once a house, and I'm on Kenyon's campus, and the attic is accessible from my office right here. Like I can see the string that I would pull down, and I have never gotten up the guts to pull it and
pull it. Oh my gosh, pull it.
Now, no. Then this would be the beginning of that horror movie that was filmed fully on Zoom.
Right. The body would tumble out, and then things would go.
Oh my gosh, this is
Elizabeth.
Yeah, look at my window. You could make all kinds of stuff. Like,
yeah, true.
Oh, I felt safe until just now. Now I'm terrified. 15 more seconds and then I will get us started. Five, four. Yeah, but I will thank attendees for showing up tonight. It's properly spooky right now, not to mention Adam's background, but I'm Elizabeth Dark, and I'm Associate Director for the Kenyon Review. And we are hosting Adam tonight with co-sponsorship from Ira Sukrungrung's position as English Department Thomas Chair. So thank you, Ira, who is also with us here. You'll be hearing from him. Micah Kim is one of our Kenyon College students who serves as a Kenyon Review Associate, and Micah will be introducing Adam in a moment. And then Oliver Pearson, also a Kenyon Review student and KR Associate and KR intern, is going to be helping us with the Q&A after the reading. Speaking of the Q&A, for those of you who are attending, you'll notice that there is a Q&A section or button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions that you would like for Adam to answer, please place them there. We are leaving the chat open during the reading, so you're welcome to react to things there or make comments there as well. Adam will not be responding immediately to those, obviously, but they're always nice to have. I'm going to really quickly point you to a couple of websites that you can visit on your own time. The first one is the Kenyon Review Reading Series calendar. We have another event coming up at the beginning of November, November 4th. Alicia Sashin will be with us. That is 7 p.m. on that Wednesday, EDT. And in addition to that, I will point you toward our bookshop link. This is where you can go to purchase Adam's books or books by anyone else who has been part of our reading series. And finally, if you would like to make a donation to the Kenyon Review, we greatly appreciate that. And the link for making donations is now in your chat box as well. So feel free to visit those at your leisure. The way this evening is going to run, I'm going to disappear in just a second. Ira's going to disappear. It's very ghost-like. And Oliver is going to disappear. Micah will then introduce Adam. Micah will then disappear, and you'll have Adam totally to yourselves. And then when that's over, we will all pop back on for the Q&A. So without further ado, I will start to make some of these folks disappear. And Micah, you can take it away.
All right. So I was introduced to Adam McOmber's work through actually my English 103. That was Writing the Body with Professor Sukrungrung. And he took us line by line, pace by pace through Sodom and Gomorrah, which was published in the Kenyon Review. In that, we noted Adam McOmber's use of the physical to become intensely intimate. We were introduced to him as an author who would strip the angels of their human clothing and join them in harmony with our own bodies. He would reach back into the literary canon and stretch it with his words, smoothing out until a parable of homophobia became an inclusive festival of the body. Aside from the aforementioned short story in the Kenyon Review, McOmber's work has been published in Conjunctions, Black Warrior Review, Diagram, and many other magazines and journals. He has authored 2 short story collections and a novel, The White Forest. He currently teaches in the MFA Writing Program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts and the Writing Program at the University of California, Los Angeles Extension. His new novel, titled Jesus and John, is in a similar vein to Sodom and Gomorrah. It tells the story of John the Apostle as he follows and cares for his lover, the risen, dead body of Jesus. Now, you'd think the guy who wrote Zombie Jesus would leave no stone unhaunted, but McOmber's stories teach readers to revere what it is to love, to become as one with another. Even if we are nothing else, we are at least each other. I'm excited to hear him again. Kenyon College, please welcome Adam McOmber.
Thank you so much for that, Micah. That was awesome. So I want to say thank you to everyone who is here. Thank you for coming to listen. I want to say thank you to Ira Sukrungrung for inviting me, and for Kenyon Review and the English department for hosting. Also Elizabeth for all her organizational work on this. Anyway, thanks so much. I'm very honored to be here to read to you guys. As Elizabeth mentioned, I do have a spooky background. It's a Scooby-Doo map painting, so I thought you guys would enjoy that. It's appropriate for October, and also just I essentially live in October all the time. So I'm going to start out with two pieces of flash fiction. I've been writing a lot of flash fiction, during quarantine and all the things that are going on. It's been kind of hard to focus on fiction and being creative and making the imagination work. I talked about that a little bit in the masterclass I taught earlier. So I'm just going to share two pieces of flash fiction, things that I've written over the course of, the last 7 months. Because these are kind of things that I could wrap my imagination around. And then I will read some pages from my new novel, Jesus and John. So the first piece is, it's set in Ohio. I'm actually from Ohio. Some of you guys know that. I'm from a small farm town called Van Wert, Ohio. So this is called Four Witches, Ohio, 1994. Here is a language for witches. No. Here is a language for high school. No. Here is magic in all its occult guises. No. Here is high school in all its occult guises. No. Here is a hallway in a high school. The floor is gray linoleum. Lockers line the walls. On the doors of some of the lockers are footballs cut from construction paper. Jersey numbers are written on the footballs in black felt tip marker. At the end of the hall is a banner that reads, "Go Bobcats." A bobcat with black ears and yellow eyes is painted in one corner of the banner. No. Here is a path in a forest at midnight. The path is lined with gray trees. Nailed to the trunks of the trees are the long, dark tongues of cows. The tongues were removed from the animals with a knife. At the far end of the path is a banner with a symbol drawn on it. No. Here is a high school student named Tom. He lives in a small town in Ohio. For the past 3 years, Tom has been in love with his best friend, Jason, who plays football. Jason has no idea that Tom is gay, or maybe he has an idea, but it doesn't matter. Tom wishes there were some spell or even a curse that would make Jason fall in love with him. No. Here is a figure in the forest. The figure passes through the trees, touching the bloodied cow tongues with the tip of its fingers. No. Tom stands in the bathroom of the high school and looks at his face. He supposes it is a handsome face. He supposes that doesn't matter. No. Here is a figure crawling like a horror between the trees. No. Here is Tom waiting for Jason after football practice. Usually they walk home together, but Jason has been more distant lately. They're both going to be seniors next year. No. Here's Tom walking home alone. No. Here are all the trees in the forest attempting to speak with their cow tongues. Blood runs from the tongues as they twitch and curl. No. Here is a hallway in a high school. Someone has torn down all the paper footballs and thrown them on the floor. Someone has torn down the banner too, ripped it in half. The bobcat stares at the ceiling with vacant yellow eyes. No. Here are the voices. They are not the voices of the trees. They are not the voices of cows. They are the voices of other things, disembodied, moving through darkness. They speak all at once in a language never heard before. Reading on Zoom is always strange, because there's no clapping. So I'm going to imagine everyone is clapping right now. I do see there's like 10 chats though. I'll picture those as clapping. So the next piece that I'm going to read as another piece of flash fiction, I wrote this about King James VI. King James is most famous for, kind of spearheading the translation of the Bible, which becomes known as the King James Bible. I'm kind of stuck on that sort of thing. King James was also known to have a series of favorites in his court. They were men. They were thought to be his male lovers. There's a great quote from King James about the Duke of Buckingham, whose name was George Villiers. King James once said, "Christ had his John and I have George." So again, kind of I always tell people, I'm going to read from Jesus and John, and I didn't make up the fact that, that they were perhaps like romantically involved. That's been around for a long time. Okay, so I'll read you this very short piece here about King James. It's from the Diary of King James. Edinburgh, 13, January 1581. A young man scales the tower now nearly every night. He enters my sleeping chamber through the high and starlit window. I recognize him as a witch, for he has no weight and floats above the floor like a dream escaped my head. His handsomeness is such that I cannot fathom it written upon a man. His hair is yellowish white and his eyes are the color of palest amber. He crawls into my bed smelling of smoke and cedar, and he talks to me in a voice so low I am caused to imagine torch-lit tunnels deep inside the earth. He tells me there are wolves in the forest near the castle and that they have learned to speak. I ask him what the wolves say, and he says they whisper of James, the young king who lives in the tower. And having heard their talk for so many nights, he has come to see for himself. Sure, he would find someone splendid and painted in gold, but I am neither splendid nor painted in gold. And yet the boy licks his teeth and huddles closer, saying the wolves talk of other things too. They say Christ is not a man. He is instead the limb of a much larger form. The wolves have traveled back along the limb and seen the great body for themselves. They have crawled upon its broad chest and seen its grinning face. The face of God, I ask? The witch boy kisses me then. His mouth tastes of acorns. Not God, he says. Not everything is God. He runs his dark tongue along my neck and reaches beneath the blanket to touch my cock. The wolves live in a cave full of rubies, he says. They sleep there amongst the stones and dream of the great body. They call it time, but it is not exactly time. He strokes my cock, slowly at first, and then faster, and soon we have left the tower. We glide together in the forest amongst the shadows of the trees. I tell him not to fly too fast. He laughs and calls me his innocence. Drink some water. Imagine clapping. So now, again, I'm going to read from my new novel that came out in June, Jesus and John. To set this up, I guess I wrote Jesus and John in part as a response to growing up gay in a small Christian farm town in Ohio. I always tell people that this is my kind of surreal retort to that experience. As you can imagine, it wasn't the most pleasant of experiences. As Micah already said in his introduction, Jesus and John were lovers, but then the crucifixion happened, which caused quite a few problems. I'm going to start from the beginning of the book, so I don't think anyone will be confused about what's going on. Okay, so here we go. The Word was made flesh, and the Word dwelt among us. This according to Peter's book. But I, called John, and only John, know a truer story still, for I remember how his flesh felt against mine, the groove of the breastbone, the sinew of the arm, as if his body had been fashioned to answer some prayer I'd been repeating ever since I was a boy. Had my own father discovered my longings, he would have drowned me in the sea. Yet this stranger had come, kind and gentle, the remnants of some finer world still clinging to his limbs. And though he gathered me along with all the rest, I was to become for him something more. I remember now the taste of him, chalk from the cliffs of Arble and smoke from the village fires. We slept in a room apart from the others. The air was hot, long after the sun had set. We lay upon our pallet and listened to the wind move the cypress trees in the garden beyond. He was long-armed, thin. He touched me in the darkness, fingers cool upon my breast. He said, "John, I will tell you things I cannot tell the others." And I confess, I did not understand his meaning then. I did not know that words could open like a mouth and a listener could be swallowed. I was young, a downy beard upon my cheeks and all my strength about me. And I was glad that he had chosen me, glad he had taken me from the boats and the sea and the tangled fishermen's nets. I kissed his neck, his lips. I looked into his eyes so dark they appeared almost painted, and I said, "Tell me what you must, my Lord, my Yeshua. Tell me, and I promise I will always listen." Jesus in this book, by the way, is referred to as Yeshua, just so you don't get confused. He did not speak his secrets then, nor did he speak them in the days that followed. It was not until the third day after his death that the revelations began. For on that day, Mary called Magdala came to us with news. I was in the room above the temple with Peter, born as Simon. The others had gone off into the streets. Some of them had wept and torn their clothes. Others had grown silent and still, as if they themselves had died and were now buried beneath a stone. Peter and I had known each other since we were boys, yet I cannot say we'd ever called each other friend. Dark-haired and forceful, he spoke with a zealot's conviction. As a youth, he'd lived for a time with the warlike men in the caves at Qumran, and it was those men who'd first called him Peter, meaning rock. Even in my earliest memories, Peter is there commanding us, dressed in his tattered brown tunic, a length of fisherman's rope tied about his waist. He behaved as if he was some noble warrior or great man of the temple. At night, he would gather us around a fire on the pebbled shores of Galilee, and there he'd tell us stories, speaking as if he imagined we were a crowd of thousands. I remember one such tale about a fabulous city sunk beneath the sea. Peter said the city lay just under the weathered hulls of our fathers' fishing boats, all golden towers and jewel-encrusted domes. And though the city was finer than Sidon or even Babylon, it had been forgotten. But we sons of Galilee must remember, Peter said. We are the descendants of that great city. And when our fathers call upon us to pull the lead rope or mend our nets with a meager piece of bone, we must imagine those grand streets and shining courts. They will not be lost forever beneath the waves. After Yeshua's death, Peter no longer told such stories. Instead, he sat in the room above the temple, grimly sharpening his sword. Unlike Peter, I sharpened no blade after Calvary. I sat at the window of the upper room and looked down at the market square below. I did not see the baskets of dried fish and vessels of date wine. Instead, I pictured the sea, the stony beaches there, and leagues of men. I thought of my own father and poor half-mad mother, and I wished somehow I could return to them, to be a boy again at their feet. Had Peter heard me speak such a desire, he would have ridiculed me, told me I was not a man. But I did not care what Peter thought. My dreams, I believed, were my own. That evening, Mary called Magdala entered the upper room as the setting sun turned bronze on the horizon. She was dressed in mourning robes, and though the room was full of lamps, she chose to stand in shadow. Mary removed her veil and held it in her hands. Her eyes were wide, her mouth oddly slack, and though I wanted nothing more than to remain alone in my own silent mourning, I forced myself to speak. "What is it, Mary? What's wrong?" She stared at me in silence, a fact that caused even greater concern, for Mary was neither meek nor circumspect. Her husband, a wealthy merchant from the East, had forbidden her to follow us, yet like so many in our loyal band, Mary refused to listen. On more than one occasion, she sold fine bracelets from her ankles and wrists to ensure we had food to eat. Often she sat with the men in the shade of the date palms, asking questions and offering prayers. I wondered if a soldier had brought harm to her. Peter had told me that 3 Roman soldiers fell upon Bartholomew on his way to the bathing pool, and another had drunkenly thrown stones at Thomas as he walked on a road near the palace. "Did someone frighten you?" I asked. "Did they try to hurt you?" Peter looked up from his sword. dark brow furrowed. If there's news, tell it plainly, Magdalene, and if there isn't, then leave us. Mary turned slowly toward Peter. She made no sound, and for a moment did not even appear to breathe. Are you unwell? I said, standing from my seat at the window, intending to go to her. The tomb, Mary said finally, and her words sounded strange, as if they were not words at all. What about the tomb? I said. I was there with the women, she said. We prayed, all of us. Then the others departed. They went to prepare food, but I stayed. I wanted to say more prayers. You've always been good about saying your prayers, I said. I knelt on the ground before the stone that covers the mouth of the tomb. Do you know the stone, John? I do. And have you put your hands upon it? She asked. I have. Then you know it is a heavy stone. I glanced at Peter, who appeared to have forgotten his sword. A heavy stone indeed, I said. Mary twisted the black veil between her fingers. The hour grew late. I worried about robbers. It was Thomas who told me about robbers in the graveyard. Thomas likes to tell his stories, I said, but he means no harm. Mary closed her eyes. I knelt on the ground very near the stone. I believed that if I was close enough, he would protect me from the robbers, just as he always protected us. Didn't he protect us, John? He did, I said. He always did. I nearly put my face upon the rock, and that's when I heard, Mary faltered. What did you hear? Speak plainly, Peter said. Don't draw the story out in a womanish way. A scratching, Mary said, at the edges of the stone, something trapped inside the tomb. Trapped, Peter leaned forward. Clawing, Mary said, a terrible noise, all around the edges. Well, what was it, Peter said, some animal? She dragged her fingers through her hair. Not an animal, that's what I've come to tell you. I don't think it was an animal at all. Peter and I ran to the tomb yard at the outskirts of the city. The graves stood like small white ships, and the sky above was a darkening sea. Together we rolled back the stone that covered the entrance to the tomb, for though the rock was heavy, 2 men could move it if they used their strength. The burial chamber was a narrow, dim cave, and I saw immediately that the shelf where we'd laid him was empty. Desecrators, Peter said through gritted teeth. I knew they'd come. The soldiers must have told them where we buried him. But why would they roll the stone back into place, I said. Why not leave the tomb open for everyone to see? They'll drag the body into some field, Peter said. Birds will pick his flesh. We have to. He hesitated then, gazing into one dark corner of the tomb, fingers curled around the hilt of his sword. I peered into the shadows too, and saw standing there a tall, gaunt figure draped in the length of a burial shroud. Funeral oils stained the shroud, and the bony form swayed from side to side as a blade of tall grass might sway in a gentle wind. What is that, John? Peter asked. I didn't reply, though I knew the answer well enough. I recognized the man who stood there in the corner of the tomb, even though his features were hidden. John, Peter said again, who stands there in the shadows? The figure shifted, twitching its hands. Yeshua, I said softly. Peter made a low sound at the back of his throat, the growl of a frightened animal. How do you know it's him? The way he stands, I said, the way he moves. But in truth, I simply knew him. I'd lain with him, touched his contours in the dark. Tell him to lie down again, Peter said flatly. What? He'll listen to you, John. He's always listened to you. I turned to the figure. Yeshua, is it really you standing there? Tell him now, Peter said. He must not stand if he is dead. Yeshua. The figure shuffled its feet, ambling forth. Perhaps it moved toward the sound of my voice, or perhaps it merely sensed the fading light at the mouth of the cave. Peter drew his sword but did not raise it. The shroud fell away, revealing a naked body beneath. The bearded face I knew so well looked etched. Both eyes were closed, sealed with wax. The jaw hung low, exposing teeth and a long, dark tongue. His flesh glowed faintly in the light, as the women had dusted it with myrrh, and his member hung limp and useless between his legs. I looked at Peter. hoping he might provide some further command, yet he only stared dumbly as the body approached. "Yeshua," I called, "please stop. I know you don't mean to frighten us." But Yeshua did not stop. He continued to move toward the mouth of the cave, shuffling his feet as he came. Peter and I ran like frightened children. We hurried back to the city, to the room above the temple. Once there, we barred the door with heavy furnishings. The room itself was empty. Mary, called Magdala, had gone to be with the women. The others had not yet returned. Peter covered his face and knelt in a corner. At first, I thought he prayed, but when he raised his head to look at me, there was terror on his face. It was some wraith, he said, or worse than that. I'd never seen Peter in such a state, not even when we'd learned the guards had taken Yeshua away. Peter had believed we would find robbers at the tomb, or even Roman soldiers, someone to fight, but instead we'd encountered something that he could not challenge, a figure he could not even comprehend. I thought about the face in the cave, Yeshua's face, our own Yeshua. He'd looked sick, possibly starved. "Perhaps we shouldn't have run," I said. Peter stared at me as if I'd gone mad. "Have you not heard what they say about the hungry dead?" "What if this is meant as some kind of sign?" I said. "You told us that yourself." Then we heard a scraping at the door, slow and careful, one scratch followed by another, down the length of the wood. "He's found us," Peter said. "Of course he has. He's been in this room many times. We've all taken supper here together." I moved toward the door to lift one of the chairs that barred it. "What are you doing?" Peter said. "I'm going to let him in." I lifted another chair. Peter shook his head. "No, you're not. You must not. What if he wasn't dead when we buried him? What if he was merely weak? Now he stands out there all alone, needing our help." "You told me your tunic was soaked in his blood," Peter said. "You told me blood rained down on you." It was true. I could still feel the heat of Yeshua's blood on my skin. There was another scrape at the door. Peter grabbed hold of my arm. "You were too close with him, John, the two of you, the way you lay together, the way you touched. You aren't thinking clearly now." I pushed Peter's hand aside. I'd been frightened when the shroud fell away in the tomb, but I knew I could not allow myself to be frightened any longer. This was Yeshua, my own Yeshua. I unbarred the door and opened it. He was there, naked. His eyes remained sealed. His jaw hung loose. I backed away from the door, and Yeshua came into the room to stand before us. I expected Peter to call out or even run, but he did not. I took Yeshua's hand. It felt like the cold earth. I turned the hand in mine, looking at the palm and the bones of the forearm. I examined the left side of his body and then the right. There were no wounds, though the Romans in their terrible bright armor had tortured him for hours. I attempted to guide Yeshua to one of the wooden chairs near the window. Whatever vague sense of reason I employed at that moment told me it might be good for him to rest. But when I gently pulled at him, his body would not be moved. He was like a heavy stone, permanent in its position. I touched his cheek. "Yeshua," he did not answer. Gingerly, I began to pick the wax from his left eyelid. When the wax was gone, I raised the lid. The dark eye beneath was still his eye, but it did not focus on my face as it once had. Instead, it stared off into the distance. I picked the wax from the other eye and raised the second lid. Then I lifted his jaw with my index finger, closing his mouth, hiding his tongue. "Do you want something to eat, Yeshua?" I said. He did not respond, yet his body looked frail. I had to try to feed him. I went to our cupboard, retrieving one of the small loaves of bread the women had baked for us. I broke the bread and attempted to give half of it to Yeshua. He did not take the bread. So I pulled a soft morsel from the loaf and put it in his mouth. The bread fell from his tongue to the floor. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was, it's such a, like I was saying earlier, like there's something so, and it totally adds to the element of horror and thrill about it, but the tone is so unrecognizable that hearing you read it is such a bizarre experience, but it's sublime at that. And I particularly love that for Witches piece you started with. I hadn't read that before coming in here, and I didn't know about it, but I loved it. And I feel like that that differed from your tone, and both in tone and content. I would say from Jesus and John, and also Sodom and Gomorrah, and the other piece you read. But so to everyone who's here, if you guys want to type questions into the chat, I am going to read them out loud. Elizabeth just messaged that, but yeah, that was so great. So a quick visual round of applause. Thank you so much. That was lovely. That was really lovely. So I have a couple questions lined up for you. I actually wrote a couple down after you read for Witches because I was so intrigued. But yeah, let's dive into this. I actually want to start with For Witches, because I think that you may not have written that first, but in terms of your life and your chronology, like as a writer, it felt like that was kind of dealing with some earlier experiences that maybe some people, we can kind of relate to as college students and as people who are still very much coming of age. So I wrote a couple things down. My first question was, as you mentioned in parts of your high school experience, I thought about how instrumental those first books are, especially for people who are in this room. I assume that we all have those first books. So what are some of the books, horror or not, which you found to be essential to your early development as a writer? And in what ways have those books embodied themselves in some of your writing today?
So I think, in high school, I very much used fiction to escape. So I wanted to escape from what essentially was around me, which I knew did not kind of accept or understand me. So I delved into books. And I will say they were fairly traditional books. So I have read all of Stephen King at this point. I've read every word that Stephen King has ever written. And he was actually a great help to me, and I thank him for that. I read lots of speculative fiction. I read Ray Bradbury, I read Isaac Asimov, but largely kind of fantasies, things that I could, go away into. I was big into Edgar Allan Poe, those kinds of things. Yeah, so, the way those fictions inform me, I think I tend to write a more disruptive kind of fiction than any of those people. But I like to think about, you kind of, I love the elements of the speculative. So I kind of import the elements of the speculative into my own kind of more disrupted and literature of protest. So I'm using their playing pieces, but I'm playing with them differently.
Sure. And I'm sure Frankenstein kind of weaved its way perfectly into that narrative.
Yes, and I love actually Dracula. Dracula is one of my all-time
Stoker. Oh, wow.
Because I think that there's that element of sexuality that's really kind of rears its head in Dracula, and I just really respond to that.
Right, I haven't read that, but I've heard great things. I've heard really great things. So yeah, that's actually my follow-up question is how did you, I guess you sort of answered it, but in actual writing, how did you arrive at horror and a genre? Was it something that you just genuinely liked and put effort into, or was it something that you felt like you had to express some of your more like outlandish and obscure ideas about identity through horror? Or
yeah, so I think that horror is really good at, it's a good space to express otherness. And I was talking in my masterclass today about the notion that kind of the reality around us is kind of a scrim, right? Think of it as like a painted curtain. And growing up in Ohio, growing up gay, I definitely recognized that there were things behind the curtain, things that people could not see, my own sexuality being one of those. And so I think horror is an exciting place, and the speculative in general, where you can kind of peel back the curtain a little bit. So that's what I want to do, is give the reader a feeling of kind of peeling back the curtain and seeing beyond kind of the mundane, the everyday, into this other space, this kind of invisible forces, I guess.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And for those of you that have read Jesus and John, that is certainly and it's certainly part of the, I would say, the climax in its embodiment. But that's I think that's a really great way to phrase horror as kind of an outlet, especially someone who has. I actually haven't found. I loved Jesus and John, but I haven't really found many horror novels that I've loved personally. But I love horror as a genre. Love horror movies. But okay, so I have a couple questions about Jesus and John, and I'm going to try to keep them as not vague, but as general as possible in regard to kind of how you approached it, and because in case not all of us have read it, I still think there are a lot of things to be addressed, and I didn't realize until you read it just now that the introduction is such a holistic, it's such an introduction to what comes afterwards. And I actually wrote down, I love it so much, I wrote down, and I read it a couple times when I read over it a couple times when I first read it too, but I just wanted to read it again.
Oliver,
what's that?
The secret to my books is that I always write a kind of overture in the beginning that almost basically tells the story in a weird way. So I'm glad that you picked up on that after having read the whole book, it's a kind of overture.
Yeah, well, I actually after I finished it, my first inclination was like, oh, I have to read this again. It's one of those where it's like, I gotta do another run through that. But the one line that stuck with me, and I actually remembered it even before you read it, was, I did not know that words could open like a mouth and a listener could be swallowed.
Yeah.
It gives me the chills. It's such a great line. It's such a great line. Okay, so I could go on for hours, but we do have our first question. And, or Ira, do you want to?
Oh, yeah, this is a question that's kind of about trajectory of your writing career. Do you remember the first thing you ever wrote? And what was it about? So I think about this. I think about the things that we first finished, right? For me, it was this story called Murder from the Heart. It was a romance thriller. A murder happened with a petri dish in a chemistry class, right? But I think the carryover for me is I still write. I'm deeply romantic in a weird way, right? That's carried over. So do you remember the first thing you had written? And this is, of course, spurned by our mutual friend, Ryan Lung, who always talks about your work in graduate school, right? And all those new stories. So.
My missteps, I think. Yes, I remember the first important thing I wrote, which it really sticks in my memory as the first thing I wrote seriously, which was in high school. And I gave it to my English teacher, who I think was, well, I shouldn't say this out loud. Never mind. She was great, and she would refer to me sometimes as a romantic. I think she sensed my queerness, and then she took that story because she really liked it and gave it to the principal. And one day, the principal over the intercom said, "Adam McOmber, please come down to the office," right? And I'm in this it's this small town school, and I thought I was in trouble in some way. And then he commended me for my writing, and this was a place where only really sports were championed. So I had never heard anyone really talk about someone's writing or art, but he did that, and it meant so much to me. It was just I communicated to these people. So yes, that is it. And it was a story about a guy, I think, with a brain tumor, actually. And through his brain tumor, he could kind of transport himself to another world, another landscape. So it was very much similar to what I write now, actually. Duality of worlds. So I think that's true. We have these kind of things that get set up early, and then that's what we write.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. I feel like we all have not all of us do, but a lot of us have that one or two English teachers in high school that make it or break it for us. But all right, first question, and this is actually a question that I had written down, and I was going to start with. So Grace, thank you. But Grace writes, the way you reimagine, embellish, and rewrite the biblical story of Jesus is creative and compelling. I'm wondering about your own religious beliefs and what background do you draw from for this biblical knowledge? What challenges do you face in reimagining a story that some consider sacred?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love I love mythic stories of any kind, and I am fascinated and have always been fascinated by the Bible. I'm so drawn to it, and it was so much fun to do research, in Christology for this book. There's an author, Bart D. Ehrman, Ehrman, I think, if you want to read some really interesting Jesus studies, that's where it's at. So I did tons and tons of research, and I will say it's a complicated question, but I tried to take it as seriously as possible. I was very I came to really care about Jesus through writing this book. In my own personal life, I'm an atheist, but I do again believe in kind of the metaphysical, that there are things around us that we cannot see, these kind of, as I called my lecture earlier, strange forces. I did a lot of research and I tried to honor the material, but I also tried to, I guess, subvert the material. I tried to make it my own and use it as a response to my own upbringing surrounded by, staunch Christians.
And Molly is another great question here, but really quickly, I want to ask, what was the spiritual process of subverting that narrative and subverting that in writing Jesus and John, which was something that I was thinking a lot about, and I felt it bleeding through some of the words.
It was a spiritual process. I often think I have a weird image in my mind of a hand or a flower that opens. And I know that when I'm imagining when I'm kind of tapping into this other space, that thing is open in my head. I'm not intellectualizing. I'm kind of drawing this material in. So that I think was part of the spiritual process. Could I do that through this story? And what I do in this novel, and you'll see if you keep reading, is I remove Jesus and John from their traditional setting, and I take them to this place in Rome called the Gray Palace. And the Gray Palace is so many different things, but it's this kind of space that they get lost in to some extent. And that, I think, it was a kind of spiritual experience for myself to get lost in that house, to think about the things that were in there.
Yeah, I felt like it was kind of a reflection. I personally was not raised with any kind of indoctrinated religion, but I felt like it could have been an interesting culmination of upbringing in a sense, which is great. But moving forward, Molly has messaged in our Q&A chat a great question. What's your editing process like with your flash fiction pieces, because she loved them?
So my editing process is I read them out loud over and over again, and I try to make sure that I have tone correct, the voice. If I have that, I know that everything will kind of fall into place, but they are, in my mind, this very kind of rhythmic thing. And I think I do a lot of cutting. So I don't want phrases in there that will kind of weigh down the text or distract. So I sharpen. I've started writing this novel. I'm trying to write this cabin in the woods horror novel, and I'm literally writing it as just sentences down the page. I assume eventually I'll put it together in paragraphs, but I'm so focused on the sentence as a unit lately, and just really nothing is allowed to be sloppy. It has to be super sharp. So that's part of my editing process, I think, is that voice or tone.
I got a question.
So one of my favorite lines in that first part, and on my first read through, and on hearing it out loud, my dreams I believed were my own, and that just seems to perfectly encapsulate the dreamlike qualities of Jesus and John going through the great palace and their interactions with one another. But also it implies that we're not exactly in possession of our dreams, and I thought that's brilliant, first of all, but I was just wondering, like, what do you have to say on that?
So I think that does go back to, I was talking about Lacan earlier, the philosopher and psychoanalyst, and the idea that, that we are part of a construct, right? So we see ourselves in the mirror, and we have this kind of other self that is out there, but also society sees that self. So again, there's all these kind of invisible forces that are pulling at us, these strings, right? And so when John says that, I think the process of this novel, to some extent, is for John to be able to find dreams of his own, because he's connected to Jesus, he's connected to Peter, he's connected later to things in the Gray Palace, and like where are John's own dreams? Where is his kind of personal spirituality, I guess, which is partly maybe what I was looking for in the book too. But yeah, he starts there, right? He's still lost in the illusion in the beginning.
Adam, so I've been thinking about this as a horror, and spec fic reader, right? Like, I think for those foundational texts that I started reading, they were primarily really kind of white male oriented, right? The authors that I was reading back then, I was thinking of Dean Koontz, King, and Clive Barker, right? Like these are the authors that I've read. But I think one of the things that you had said earlier in the masterclass, and one of the things I've talked about in class, is how speculative fiction, in many ways, or genre fiction, has a really clear fingers on the pulse of what's going on socially, right? And I was wondering if you can think of authors who are challenging, like, for example, the horror narrative, and maybe or in changing what it could be in terms of not just what it's saying to a larger culture, but what these writers are offering to this genre.
Yeah, I think I brought up Reza Negarestani. I really like his book right now. And of course, I'm going to blank on the title because I don't have titles in front of me right now. But that idea, he basically is updating H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft being, a racist, actually. So there is this, and we have things like Lovecraft Country, the novel, and now the HBO show. So kind of pushing against that, kind of trying to find the edges of that, trying to escape from, I guess, the prison of that, So yeah, are you thinking of any certain ones, Ira, any certain texts that you are?
The writer that I keep coming back to, and this is a book I think I had loaned to Michael, but Victor Laval.
Yeah.
Like his novel Changeling was just so great. The Ballad of, blanking on the title, Ballad of Tom, I think something in there. It's such a wonderful novella, but he, for example, is a writer that comes up to me. And I think, there's a slew of like these writers now, Karen Russell, right, Vampires in the Lemon Grove. And I love, I devour Kelly Link over and over again. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time because I think there's things happening that are talking about, like, and that you said allegory in many ways, right? Like in many ways, these things are pushing against their counter narratives to what we've come accustomed to.
That's right. And other voices being invited in, or other voices actually, crashing down the doors and coming in, And I do think, though, that I've always thought that there is this kind of line of queerness, at least, in, the Gothic, those kinds of things, that I feel that in something like Bram Stoker's Dracula, that it might not be on the surface, but that has always been kind of a place to speak the truth, Picture of Dorian Gray, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's exciting that there are all different ways to speak the truth through the speculative now.
I agree. Ira, that was beautifully phrased, and you're so right. The horror genre as a social critique is so poignant and so effective consistently from the 19th century to today, whether it be a Zoom horror movie or Jesus and John. But we have one last question here that concerns the first piece, and then I think we're going to start to wrap up. Unless you guys have any questions you guys want to ask, it's the last call. So yeah. So somebody asked, can you speak to the repeated use of the interrupting no in the first piece you read? How did you arrive at that as a device? Is it at all connected to the idea of the importance of rhythm, which you spoke about earlier?
So, okay, so there's probably an honest answer to that, and then maybe more of a fancy answer.
Start with the honest one. You want the honest answer.
So I had this contest with my friend Brian Leong, who Ira brought up earlier as well, this summer. And basically we challenged each other. We were gonna write one piece of flash fiction per day for like 2 weeks. And that sounds fun until you start actually having to do it, right? So you have to come up with these ideas every single day and write something. And so what I realized was I really needed a structure for each piece. Like it couldn't just be something I kind of rambled out. I would have to figure out a form. And I'm going to go back to voice here, that I oftentimes just like speak out loud. I'm reading out loud and I kind of get in the flow of something, and I heard it respond with a no. And I'm trying to think, like, it feels almost like the cosmic no to me, right? So this kind of like refusal. I was thinking about myself in high school and how I often mentally spoke that no, just about the things that were going around me. And so I spoke the no in that piece. And then each time it says no, it flashes to that kind of more fantastical thing, right? The thing that is maybe inside of the character that's not really happening. And then it says no again and has to flash back to the kind of painful experience of the high school. So so the no is kind of a way of shuttling back and forth. But again, I'm going to say it's like this cosmic no spoken by a gay high school student in 1994.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you all of you for being a part of this event with us. Oliver, Ira, Micah, thank you so much. And thank you to our attendees. Adam, people are coming to this event either because they are in Gambier or because they are elsewhere and they wish they were in Gambier, or they're a larger part of the Kenyon Review family. So people are tuning in from all over.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and you've made it very much worth our time. I will point all of you again, just a few more plugs from me. If you would like to purchase Adam's books, you can visit our bookshop from our website. And if you would like to show up for some events in our future, we have our Kenyon Review reading series. And finally, if you are feeling ever so generous and would like to make a donation to the Kenyon Review, you can visit this link. And while there, if you just go to kenyonreview.org, you can see all the other amazing things that we have going on. But Adam, you've put me in the October Halloween mood. I have been kind of looking back at this window behind me during this reading.
Ooh, a darkened window, yes.
I know, it's gotten a lot darker, and now I have to exit this building without totally freaking out on my way down the stairs, the dark stairs. But yeah, thank you, and thank you all of you. Thank you, attendees, and have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful October.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Micah.